Does this current rally we have, S&P is now at about $415. It was at 385 literally 7 days ago. It just went up about 4 or 5%. Does this have any legitimacy to it, or is it a dead cat bounce? Justin, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I was just pulling up the chart. So 5 days chart, S&P up 6%, and then I had the NASDAQ, which is probably more relevant to most of our viewers, up 6.5%. But you zoom out on the 1 month chart. I mean, we had a bounce, mid-May. It's a better bounce this time around. But you zoom out, it's still pretty painful. Year to date, we're down 24% on the NASDAQ. And yeah, I mean, is this a dead cat bounce? I think that, I don't know if it continues, but you can't trust any rally to be sustainable unless the market has certainty around inflation. Because that's unless you get certainty around inflation. Do we have certainty around inflation yet? The answer is no. We just spent a lot of time talking about this. The answer is no. Nobody knows what's happening with oil prices, what's happening with housing prices, what's happening with blah, blah, blah. So until we get clarity.
But Justin, do you think there is a little bit of certainty around inflation peaking, which is why we're getting the rally right now?
Well, do you think are you certain inflation's peaked?
I'm not certain. I think the market is wanting to feel certain.
Yeah. So let's look at CPI.
Bullhead. Bullhead.
I still think I'm going to win this, but we'll see.
You're not winning that.
We're going to win our bet over here. CPI. Okay. So I kind of agree. The encouraging piece of that is that April to March CPI is decelerating. Now, right? May numbers, we're going to get it in maybe a week. That's going to be very, very telling. Does it reaccelerate or does it continue decelerating? And Tom and my hair on the balance. More important things are on the balance. But the market's rally won't be sustainable in long term until we have clarity around inflation.
All right, Tom, do you think this is a dead cat bounce?
It's a complicated question, and I'll give you a complicated answer. So much like your hair, nobody knows what the fuck is going on with inflation. So I'm not going to be sitting here pretending like I know what's going on, because I don't. But I look at the S&P 500, I look at the fear and greed index. We're at peak fear right now. The index is at 22, maximum fear. You were yesterday in our Zoom call, Amit, we were talking about that, about peak fear. So at peak fear, you usually see the beginning of a little bit of smart money greed. The famous saying by Warren Buffett, when everybody's fearful, I'm greedy. That starts to happen at peak fear. Now, if you combine that with the fact that we already are 6 months into this negative run since December, on an average, these negative runs tend to last about 10 months. We're starting to near the end of, statistically at least, what a bear market run is. Now, looking at the S&P 500, look, it's really crazy to see a 6% swing on the green in 5 days in the index, like an S&P 500, an index that in a normal year does 8% a year. So it's not something you see every day. So it would seem like it's a dead cat bounce, and maybe it is, I don't know. But if you look at year to date, we're still down 13.5% on the S&P 500. So the question here is, what's going on with this index and in this economy? And there's 3 terms you got to look at here. You have to look at the Russia-Ukraine situation, you have to look at China lockdown situation, and you have to look at the interest policy of the Fed and the monetary policy to get a clarity, some sort of clarity of where this thing is headed. Now, Russia-Ukraine, nobody knows exactly when and if this thing is going to get resolved. Maybe it turns into the next Afghanistan, which Russia spent a decade in this attrition war. In that case, that's pretty much going to keep things fucked up as they are right now. China is making voices as if mid-June is where they reopen everything before the entire country falls to fucking pieces. So maybe that's a good positive catalyst. The Fed absolutely has no choice but to raise interest rates, and aggressively, because they're way lagging behind inflation. So free money era is ending. Fed is getting more aggressive. Russia, Ukraine, more uncertain. And China, maybe the only positive catalyst in this whole mixed bag of clusterfuckery. So I'm not too optimistic long term, but hey, this is a crazy market. We might see this crazy run for a few more weeks. Who knows?
I thought you were ceding your time, Tom.
Oh, sorry. I'll cede my Cathy Wood time.
No, okay. I just want to add one really quick thing that I find interesting is the one thing I think on the oversold thing, it makes sense that we are at peak fear on the oversold piece. But in terms of the VIX, we haven't seen kind of a massive spike. But then again, this is not a kind of a crisis type of market crash, right? In 2008, there was some sort of crisis. And in 2000, there was a crisis. But something that I want to point out is the market, the S&P 500, went down from July, August 2007 to August 2008, and then crashed when everything hit like shit hit the fan. So we're at VIX levels of 2007 to 2008, but we haven't seen some sort of volatility spike. Now, I don't know if we are ever going to see a volatility spike. Maybe inflation just kind of turns over a little bit and it's more gradual. That's what I'm hoping. So I hope we don't see a volatility spike, but folks are actually looking for a volatility spike to signal a bottom. I think it's more complicated than that.
I just want to add, this was, as always, words of wisdom. I want to add two things. Number one, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor for today's show, which is the lovely Roy community, which you forgot to do, Justin, and you should have. So a huge shout out. Currently the best source for stock picking, which is becoming harder and harder, as you all know, Palantir. We should do an inverse fund, me, Kramer, and Kathy, see who does worse, because
I think Kathy does the worst.
Now. I should not be saying anything about Kathy Wood. I'm just as bad as her right now. But I just want to point out one of the best resources beyond ROIC right now for information about the market, more on the macro side. There's this amazing on Substack, this amazing newsletter called Market Sentiment. I don't know if you guys heard about it. They don't have a lot of subscribers, but some of the best stuff on the internet for macro. They have a brilliant article called Buy the Dip. And in the Buy the Dip article, these guys, brilliant work. They analyzed the last three crashes. Justin, I spoke about that with my community. Can you learn to speak, my guy, on the Zoom call yesterday, and we showed it. So basically, the strategy in the Buy the Dip, if you scroll down to the strategy, so they look at three strategies, right? Conservative, staying in, selling, or doubling down in times of crisis. So essentially, if you scroll down, you'll see what happens 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, and into eternity. So buying the dip, which means doubling down, DCAing into a crisis, was, as you can see on the screen right now, exponentially a better strategy long term. 1 year, it was better. 3 years, it was even better. 5 years, it was insanely better. So whatever we have right now is an academic discussion about where this market is heading. It's nice to try and figure out what's the weather going to be like tomorrow. But here's some fact check. None of this really matters. And people like to fearmonger. Oh, you haven't seen the market crash. Motherfucker, I've seen 2000, I've seen 2008. So chill the fuck down. Market crashes are horrible. They're painful. But if you're doubling down into the index, into S&P 500, long-term, there's absolutely no way that you can lose money. Long-term, DCAing into the S&P 500 is just betting on the U.S. economy. Since 1981, has never been a failing strategy. Point blank, period. So this whole discussion is pure academic. Double down into S&P 500, stay in the game longer. Timing the market is not as good as time in the market. Simple as that. Go read the Market Sentiment. Amazing work.